As said, my name is Stephen Miller. I'm going to talk about the Manx Language Society and the phonograph. And this phrase, a new ally has come to the cause, will soon be made apparent. Well, I got a few slides in. What do I mean by Manx? I think a lot of people may need to know that Manx refers to the Isle of Man. I'll stand up and move around at times. This is the Isle of Man. You can see here it sits basically in the north of the Irish Sea. It's equidistant between Ireland, Scotland and England. And this is the Isle of Man. The size of this screen, I think the Isle of Man's almost actual size here, to be quite frank. In old money, it's basically 30 miles from north to south, and from Douglas to Peel, it's about 12 miles. Douglas is the capital. Peel is on the sort of the west coast here. Peel plays a sort of a prominent role in this particular story. Castletown is the former capital down there in the south due to the Mormon's curse in the 19th century. They'd lost the title of capital, which then moved to Douglas. So as you can see, there's sort of basically a quite hilly, sort of the hilly spine to the island, sort of it's rather flat in the north, but most of the settlements are all around the periphery on the coast there as well. So, but what's the background of this particular, say the phonograph turns up in 1905, but in this particular period, the Isle of Man is an island in decline, you would have to say. Look at the population there, 1891, you can sort of see it's just over 55,500 people. By 1901, it had dropped to just close on 55,000. It's a farming community in the main in this particular period. There had been lead mining at Foxdale and Laxey, but that was now starting to decline. There'd been a considerable fishing fleets developed in both Peel and in Port St Mary. They fished off the Irish coast, the Kinsale mackerel fishing. That had actually completely, I wouldn't even say it was in serious or terminal decline, it had actually ended. They were selling boats just simply for the cost of the iron and the cost of the timber. Such was the particular drop-off. Continuing emigration to America or Australia, the newspapers used to carry obituaries from the Cleveland Plain Dealer of Manx people who had died in America. And I say the only area in the island in which there was any sort of anything happening really was Douglas. I say then the capital is now a seaside resort for northern England. You may notice up there, the 1901 census had a language question, and it returned as 4,598 Manx and English speakers. You can always debate about what that figure truly means in terms of fluency, language use, but as a community language, Manx had certainly passed in the 1850s. In fact, the census record, you can see there's no transmission of language in the main to younger speakers. So whilst all of this shows decline in population, and we've got a software update kicking in now. Whoops, I can't see to kill. That doesn't matter. Anyway, I can still read the screen. So, you know, whilst you can see this decline in population, decline in industry, this was not seen by the Manx Language Society as a decline in the language. They saw this as a great celebration, that there were clearly more Manx speakers than they had expected to find. So this for them was sort of almost like a moment, the only sort of good news there was in this particular period. Hang on, sorry, I've got a software update coming in here. I can't seem to, Done it, found the cursor. I'm cursed by the cursor, it seems, cursed by the cursor. Okay, I'll slow down a bit here. I want to wheel this back a bit here, because in the 1890s, there'd been considerable folk song collecting in the Isle of Man. We had A.W. Moore was active, Dr. John Clegg was active, and the Gill brothers were active as well. This is W.H. Gill and his brother John Frederick Gill as well. And I've got this slide here. These are what I call the Victorian doubters, because they make plain here. This is Gill here considering use of the phonograph. Next time I come over, I will fetch a compass. There's a serious question, the almost difficulty of getting an absolutely true first record. In other words, I'll bring a phonograph. So I'm at 1897 here. But even then, the thing would have to be translated into black and white, and different translator would translate differently. So we don't know where we are. So this is another sort of mention here. This is later on here, 1898. You know, who would care for the result, as he says? You know, if the tunes are written down with a phonograph exactly as we heard them, you know, vagueness of tempo, uncertainties of intonation, little quavers, embellishments, quite unrepresented by ordinary musical notation. You know, who would care for the result? Well, we all would care for the result, you feel like saying to him. This is what this, and I think it's intriguing because this is almost like this presages the criticism that Percy Grainger faced with that great paper, collecting with the phonograph. So we already have these Victorian doubters, these people who could have adopted the phonograph, but they have this particular doubts about its particular utility. There were, of course, first uses of the phonograph before the Manx Language Society turns up in 1905 with them. And this is perhaps, this date is wrong, as 1899 is the newspaper reference, but it refers to the event would have taken place on St. Stephen's Day in 1898. This is Mr. Gilmore. I never got to know what his first name is. He always seems to be Mr. Gilmore. He ran the telephone company in the Isle of Man, and he was a gadgets man, they said. And this is him recording the Hunt the Wren song. This is a processional custom, it's a house visiting custom on St. Stephen's Day, or Boxing Day as it is in England. And so this is the first capture, as it were, as it puts here, as a remarkably good capture too. As come down vigorous horn blowing. This is something that's not recorded in the record, that when people are going out hunt the wren, they're actually going round accompanied by blowing horns. But already a particular note of failure here. For some reason, however, the instrument failed to make itself heard in the reproduction. So near and yet so far, it's captured and yet it fails to particularly play back. Another mention here, this is Joseph Woods. This is the Graphophone, 1899. This is the song Mully Karen. This is Thomas Crellin. He's the second from the right on the back row there. He was a fiddler, a well-known tradition bearer. He paid for his daughter's dowry with pennies that he collected from fiddling, and he took them along on a wheelbarrow to the wedding and delivered the dowry off that way. And once again, this now we see the figures here from the Pan-Celtic revival, or the Pan-Celtic enthusiasm, however you want to say here. This is E. Fournier here writing to George Wood. George Wood was a Manx bibliophile. And these are records here taken. Again, 1899, here's Mr. Radcliffe. This is likely William Radcliffe, who was the schoolmaster at the parochial schoolmaster Kirkandras in the north of the island. So you see already this interest here in capturing Manx, although once again this is not the sort of material as ethnographers, as folklorists would be after. This is just recitation here of the 10 Commandments. But once again, the Manx Language Society, you see, formed 1899. This is formed before they have the results from the 1901 census, so they've no idea how many Manx speakers there are. But they are formed, as say, after the end of that fin de siècle, that notion that Manx is going, the language is going, the culture is going, the people are going as well. So we're going to form this particular society. And this is what happens. Basically, 1902, it's proposed to buy a phonograph. There's no discussion, there's no debate like we shouldn't have one. The idea is, yes, this is a good idea. 1902, they don't have any money. They have the good idea, they don't have any money. 1903, they still have the good idea and they have the money. They have £12 on the balance sheet. 1904, they purchase it. 1905, up it turns. And this is the great phrase. This is Sophia Morrison, who was the secretary of the Manx Language Society. She really has a great turn of phrase here. A new ally has come to the cause in the form of an Edison phonograph. It was also described as an inanimate member of the society as well. And you can see it's already been going out here. So it's been in the south of the island, it's been in the west of the island, and we're going to send it on tours through the north and the east during the winter. It has been found that bass voices, as a rule, make the best records. And this is it. The phonograph survives, and there's a better photograph of the phonograph assembled, but this is the only one that could be found for me for the talk. The phonograph survives. And as I say, this is a systematic program, and this is a form letter. This is in Sophia Morrison's copybook here, so it's already turned up in November here. And this is the idea here. This is Emily Gill. She was the Archdeacon Gill's daughter. And so it's thought here to bracket together for the work persons of education and musical abilities with others who, though full of zeal for the cause, have not those advantages. This is Sophia Morrison's phrase for the Manx revival. It was the cause. The cause. She always writes down about, asking people to do things for the cause. And here she is. Now then, there's a particular problem with this particular photograph. This is taken at the Pan-Celtic Congress in Carnarvon in 1904. This shows Sophia Morrison and it shows Otti Jochen. They were both members of the Peel Manx Language Association. This was a separate language society. But it is Sophia Morrison who is the key figure in this all of these particular revival activities. The problem is we don't know whether Sophia Morrison is on the left or whether Sophia Morrison is on the right. And so there are two schools of thought. So you can join the leftist school and say that's her on the right, or you can join the rightist school and say that that is her on the right. But the intriguing thing about these two particular figures is that their fathers both made money in the fishing industry. So Sophia Morrison's father was a grocer and provisions dealer. He made pots of money from the fishing fleet, invested it in property, which is why his unmarried daughters lived off the rents from the properties. He prospered because he got out in time. Otti Jochen's father, however, stayed in too late and went bankrupt in 1900 with debts of £10,000. And so I find interesting here you have these two daughters who are using the tools of modernity to create the usable past through their pan-Celtic, through their revival activities, and it's their parents who have been involved in sort of mercantile capitalism in the island that transforms the island's economic base for a very short while until it all sort of falls apart. This is a particular problem they had as well here. More frivolity is to be desired. As say, Sophia Morrison had a particularly great turn of phrase. And what they found particular issue, the Isle of Man, Manxness and Methodism goes together in the Isle of Man. It is still a sort of a deeply religious society. It is still a very Methodist society here. And there was a particular issue here that people only wanted to have hymns and carvels. Carvels are carols composed in Manx Gaelic that are sung at Christmastide. This is all they wanted to do, that, you know, what should be handed down to posterity should be hymns or scripture or carvels. But more frivolity is to be desired, she wrote here as well. So, but there was some frivolity on display. This is the first list of recordings we have here from 1905. This is played at the annual meeting of the Manx Language Society here. You can see here William Kane here, Mully Karen, Kiri Phonacti, that's The Sheep Under the Snow. Very common folk songs here. Two hymns from Caesar Cashin, the Creed, Lord's Prayer. Ecna Fiddlern, that's another traditional Manx folk song. Neddy Hom Roy, that's Little Redhead Eddie. That's title. That's the first time this has ever been recorded. Hymns, Wreck of the Herring Fleet. It's another folk song. Hop Tune, that's another processional house visiting custom. That's a song that's sung on that. And John Quirky, an original sort of yarn about the fishing. And this is a short mention here. This is Morrison herself in action. This is from a sort of a manuscript in Morrison's hands here, talking about, this is a song here, a song of the Dalby Ferries. This is Aren Gelby here. And so she meets this Manx exile, this Manx emigrant here, this miner in Arizona, short visit. He had invited to my home and sort of he sang 20 minutes to spare, but he sang two songs into the horn, the song of the Dalby Ferries and the genuine Manx version of Hunt, 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 Hunt the Wren. So that's Morrison. Now there are two intriguing little, but I find these slides intriguing, to be honest here, is that no sooner do we have the phonograph being used, then we have the usual rube story coming up here. You go out, you record someone, and they play the recording back to the person, and they say, my God, that fella speaks Manx better than me. You know, or else there's some particular hesitation or something, and that man, God, he speaks Manx better than me, but there's no need to mimic me. Why is he mimicking me doing this? So we get this quite early on here. You have this from 1905, sort of a rube, sort of very early rube story there as well. You have this other one, which I actually find, this is a great line. It's a party of scholarly folk. This is from a novel, The Widder Man by T. Kingston Clark. There's only a few copies of this book. My father got me a copy of this in a jumble sale for 50p, and I found out he actually lives in the next street from me. I was brought to him at Central Drive, and he lives in Royal Avenue. But this is an incident from a novel that features the Manx Language Society's phonograph. I find this quite bizarre, you know. The Manx language is dying out fast. You know, John Sansbury at Serby. I'm proud of his acquaintance. You know, they're up there with a phonograph and so on. Now, Serby is a real place. Serby is where they were in 1905. We know that from newspaper accounts. And John Sansbury is a real person. So I suspect this is an incident that took part in the collecting of the phonograph. It turns up in this particular novel. If not, it gives a great title for an article. There's no doubt about that. Of course, as I say, we not only have the pan-Celtic influence here, we not just have sort of Funier turning up in the island, we just don't have Morrison and Jochen going after the pan-Celtic Congress. We also have the visit, and this is the great link with Vienna here, we have Rudolf Triebisch turning up here on behalf of the Phonogram Archive in 1907 and 1909. He turns up in the newspaper here. He's announced in the Isle of Man Weekly Times here. He's Adolf as opposed to Rudolf. He's a well-known savant. He's anxious to take phonograph records in the Manx, and if anyone knows of anyone, then communicate with William Cubbon, who was involved with the Manx Language Society. So he's here there in 1907. He also turns up in 1909 as well, because he gets mentioned here in Morrison's report here to the Manx Language Society. And so once again, he's sort of a mention of him here. It's intriguing here that Morrison is mentioning that it's Arthur Moore mentioning that the Triebisch was here. This suggests that Morrison wasn't in the island at the time. She was occasionally a housekeeper to her brother, because I think this has sort of ramifications on why there's no links established between the Manx Language Society and the Phonogram Archive in Vienna. Of Triebisch's recordings, the 1907 recordings are now lost. The 1909 recordings, however, are present in the Phonogram Archive. However, he realised that the people who he was being brought to have recorded were not native speakers of Manx. And I think this is because Morrison is not in the island, Morrison is not involved, it's left to A.W. Moore, and he just basically brings his friends along, and they are all learners or semi-native speakers of the particular language. There is a very good article, though, that Triebisch publishes on his adventures in the particular Celtic lands in this period. Okay, the inevitable question there, I talked about the 1905 playing of the cylinders, but how long does this program go on for? Well, it was certainly running as late as 1913. We have here letters here from Sophia Morrison to J.J. Neen here. I'm hoping you'll be able to use the the Manx Language Society phonograph during the winter. Box of blank records and so on. And there's a mention here in Man in a Small Press Journal, one of those other features of modernity here that Morrison set up and edited. However, 1913, let's go back to the balance sheets of the Manx Language Society. 1905, here you see the purchase price for the phonograph, £7 15 shillings, blank record, repairs. 1906, there's no report for 1907. 1908, blank records, and after that there's no further mention in the balance sheet. There's no mentions in the balance sheet. There's also no mentions in the annual reports that the phonograph is being used, which is surprising because they mention everything else that is going on, but this recording program, it just simply drops out of sight. Issue, of course, that we know goes throughout this particular conference is that it's not so sooner realised when you've got a phonograph, you realise the more times you play them back that the cylinders are going to decay, so what are you going to do? If it's determined here to create this permanent record, what are you going to do? 1907 here, Pan-Celtic Congress at Edinburgh. They're already talking here about buying some metal moulds for future generations as wax cylinders break so easily. Applause. Well, yes, we know that. So there's a foot here to actually do something about this one. And this is an intriguing letter. This is written to William Cole. William Cole's another pioneer of folk song and dialect collecting in Essex. He was described as Mr. Talking Machine, I think was the phrase the Essex Chronicle referred to him as well. And this is a letter. Somehow he heard of Sophia Morrison's recording ventures and suggested that they all go in together. And there's a longer letter which I published. I edited and published this letter recently. And so they were talking here about going in and basically paying to have the galvanos made of the cylinders. I don't think anything, certainly nothing happened from the Manx side, and I don't think anything happened from sort of the Essex side as well of this. And so I'm running to the end of my talk. The question here at the end of the day is, so what remains? What do we have from this, from what did the new ally leave us behind? You can see here the great sort of mention here from 1905 here from Canon Savage, who's the president of the Manx Language Society. Our phonograph will preserve the speech and accent of Manx people of this generation from different parts of the island. We got a country view here from 1906 here from John Nelson, and I'm sending you a box containing 8 broken records and 4 cut records which has some blemishes on, and they are not, to my mind, satisfactory to leave for after generations to hear. And it is the material that John Nelson sends to William Cubbon, which is all that we have. And this is all that remains of this particular recording procedure. We have basically 6 cylinders here. This is by John Nelson, John Nelson, John Nelson, John Nelson, John Nelson, as J.F. Cannell. As you can see here, what I mentioned here, the more frivolity is to be desired, where you were never going to get that from John Nelson. He was a teetotaler. Although he did run a public house called the Waterloo in Ramsey, which is still there. But you can see here, he's simply recording himself. Part of the evening prayer read by J. Nelson, hymn, the new name, translated and sung by John Nelson. J.F. Cannell, that's a prayer. Once again, it's Corinthians. That's the Holy Communion. This is the only cylinder that is likely to have, shall we say, some sort of ethnographic material. And this is the Qualtag song. The Qualtag is the first caller on New Year's Day. So the Qualtag is the first footer. This is first footing, and this is from William Quayle, CP, who's the captain of the parish in this one. This is William Quayle from Agnish. He actually ran a small local Manx Language Society, the Shesig Agnish. So that's the only material that is all that we have from this particular recording program. And as I say, that's just what one of the cylinders looks like. You can see there's particular damage on the cylinder there. And once again, that's all we have. It looks like a pint of Guinness or something, doesn't it, on the top there? But I can assure you that it isn't. Sorry if I've been too fast on this one. Sorry if I've run too much. But as I say, you can have copies of the slides. So you can take copies of the slides, ask me a copy of the slides, and you can also have all the source material as well, built on this as well. I sort of have what I call a dossier as well of all the original source material. So if anyone wants to work further on this particular, please do. I'm more than willing to actually pass the material on to you. So I hope you got something from that. If I can just summarize that, you can obviously see we have the Victorian doubters, we have the sort of the early use of the phonograph, we have the Edwardian faith in the phonograph, the purchase of the phonograph, particular problems of collecting materials. We have the particular problems of how long the recording program goes on for, awareness of that these cylinders are not permanent. We also have then the pan-Celtic enthusiasts of visiting the An, and then we also have Trebishter. So it's a whole sort of network available on network here as well. That's enough for me, otherwise I'll start off another talk and start talking in. But thank you all again. I hope you got something from that.